Y'all join palms. Repeat after me. I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
Keeping the palms joined. Palms down. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to Intro to Buddhism and Meditation, live from the Dharma Bum Temple. It's a packed house. I'm glad you're all here today. Just kidding, nobody's here. There's probably somebody out there who's like, what? Wait a minute, you're at the temple? Yeah, thanks for joining us. It's around the time where everybody would be complaining about how hot it is here. And we get to feel that sweat like just drip down your back. And I would eventually start talking about how that's a very good practice to just sit with something that is present and not try to fix it. So wherever you are, yeah. Fans. Exactly. Higher, lower, cooler, hotter, louder, softer. We always want to change something. And some things we can change and some things we can't. So part of it is just learning to do with things as they are. And that's not always fun, but it's where we're at. So I want to take a minute or two just for everybody to get settled. And for those who are joining us for the first time, welcome. On the YouTube there's a little chat box. I often like to start with just a little brief question. How are you feeling right now? We'll make it a simple one that doesn't require a lot of thought. But it's a good way for you all to just kind of share with everybody else that's joined in. You can connect and get an idea of the people you know that you're sitting with. But why don't you just go ahead and type a couple words that explain how you're feeling right now. And, it's, I think, really important when you sit and go into a meditation practice to just kind of check in with how am I now? Not how was I an hour ago or 10 minutes ago or even 3 minutes ago or what's later, but what am I sitting with right now? And I think these are very important reflections to just honestly explore. And maybe even, express to others honestly how you are. We're so used to the, hi, how are you? I'm fine, thank you. How are you? When most of us know that when we say I'm fine, we're not usually fine. But it's good to just be honest with how you're doing, I think. And to not always put on a face or present that everything's okay. And learning to be comfortable with things that are not okay. So, which is ironic since the Buddha's first teaching was life is filled with suffering. So if you haven't embraced that yet, you're going to have a tough time with this journey. So how is everybody? Anyone share yet? Somebody sent me a text and they told me that when they watch on their mobile phone, they can't actually do the chat. So, I don't know, but go ahead.
So Patrice shared that they're feeling grateful.
Great, thank you.
C shared feeling very good today.
Good.
Bill, mostly peace in the midst of chaos. Tom's chill. Cynthia is feeling happy. Probably because she hasn't watched the news in 16 weeks or so.
16 weeks?
Yeah.
Nice. And my guess is you probably still know what's going on, even without watching the news. So, congratulations.
Chuck is glad to be alive.
Nice. Really, 16 weeks you haven't watched the news? That's phenomenal. I'm impressed because I know how important the news has been to you. So, it can change your day a lot if you don't flood yourself with news and social media. But anyone else or anything else anybody wants to share? All right. Well, good. We'll go ahead and start with a meditation practice. For those who are here, maybe for the first time, a couple things to tell you before we begin. Nothing's going to happen to you. You won't float away. You won't have any mystical, magical experiences. The mind that races all day long is not going to shut off. Don't judge your practice, meaning don't ask yourself, is this working, is it not working, or are you doing it right or wrong? We're just going to sit, we're going to breathe. You'll hear sounds wherever you are, inside or outside. This is life. Life is filled with chaos and sounds, and the practice of meditation is learning to get quiet and still within all the sounds. Don't expect anything, right? We're just going to sit and breathe. Posture, you want to be comfortable. If you're on a cushion, it often helps side to the front third. Pushing the stomach forward allows the back to straighten. Shoulders can be relaxed. Hands can be on the knees or the lap, whatever's comfortable for you. If you're on the bench or a chair, also just trying to sit up straight, relaxing the shoulders. Also hands on the knees or the lap. I'll suggest closing the eyes if comfortable or slightly open. Mouth is open or closed. I will guide us as we begin, and we'll settle into a little bit of silence. Most important with the practice, don't expect anything. We're just going to sit and breathe. And starting with the eyes closed if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth is open or closed. Start with taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And eventually, settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Start with gently guiding the attention, focus to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice, observing the sensation of breath, expecting nothing but to sit and breathe. As the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it, release that thought, return attention, focus to the breath. Where's your mind? Return attention, focus to the breath. keeping the mind alert. Aware of each sound. Each thought. Each physical sensation. Yet concerned with nothing but sitting, breathing. Letting go of expectations. Letting go of judgment from the practice. Just sitting, breathing. When the body is still, resting. speech quiet, aware of all sounds. The mind learning to settle. Know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do. Nowhere else to go. No one else to be. Everything beautiful, just as it is. Sitting, breathing. And once again, taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. As you slowly open the eyes, slowly begin to move. The most important with the practice of meditation is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference, if there is one. Ask yourselves how you prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And realize however you feel now, it's quiet, calm, and still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment, has nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how we sit and hold the hands or cross the legs. It's nothing to do with the sounds around us or anything else for that matter. It has everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samutpatti, dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddhist awakening, where Buddha simply means awaken. He was a human being no different than any one of us who began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. What that means, very simply, for all of us, regardless of where we come from or what we believe in or where we think we're going, your whole life is filled with things that happen, and you react. More stuff happens, more reactions. Practice of meditation is learning what it's like to respond to something quietly, peacefully, still. Because for most of us, the way you responded to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how you respond to everything else that's happening throughout your day. So all we're working on is closing the gap where the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to you in your respective lives. But with a mind that's steady, clear, focused, distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. It's not an easy practice. It's not a fun practice necessarily. It's not an escape as often people think it is. If your life is a crazy, hectic mess, meditation doesn't fix that. It makes you become aware of why your life is a crazy, hectic mess. And then you begin to make changes so your life is a little more comfortable. Often people run to meditation or Buddhist practice thinking it's going to fix everything and make everything better. The only thing that fixes things and makes things better is you. You know, it's really, when I asked the question earlier to just kind of share how you were doing, the thought that popped in my head at that moment was really how neat it is to be sitting in a place that we've had for, well, this place 3.5, but downtown 10.5, but to be sitting in something that we've had for 14 years that really does change people's lives. And I think we lose sight of that very often because we get maybe wrapped up in too many other things, or maybe I lose sight of that very often, just being kind of wrapped up and focused on whatever we're doing. But, you know, as Travis was reading what people shared and the names were popping up, and I am guessing, although last week it was the wrong Chaz, but I'm guessing by the names that I know, you know, or knew most of you. It's really kind of cool to see something that, with people's effort, meaning yours, and your diligence to practice and to hold space together and to care for the temple here and to put in the time and effort required in your own life now to meditate and look at Buddhist teachings and integrate it, how it really does change your life. And so I know, as I always say, meditation, Buddhist practice doesn't fix things or change things. I still believe that, but when you put these practices into your life, you change. And when you change, your life changes. So, you know, if you think of someone who just won't eat and they're starving themselves, well, all the different types of food or whatever you put in front of them doesn't really matter if the person's not willing to eat themselves. So I think of meditation and Buddhist practice or any spiritual path you're on in a very similar way, that there's so many different paths and journeys and things to choose from. But you still have to pick and choose one or a few and do them. So if you're here with us today, obviously this is one of the things you've chosen. And I'm glad because, you know, for me, for the last 20 plus years, I've seen people's lives drastically change from cultivating what we call wisdom and compassion and putting that into your life. So I'm grateful that when it comes back to how are you doing, for me, it's always gratitude when I sit here and I look down at these wood floors and I look at the space we're in and I see Travis sitting there. And, I can almost see the Bodhi tree through the windows here, and it's just a feeling of gratitude to be around and with so many people who work so hard to change their lives. So with that, I'll stop. I'll just, as always, I prefer to respond to questions. If you're joining us for the first time, there's a chat box somewhere on your screen there, most likely. So any questions you may have around meditation, Buddhist practice. For me, I just touched on gratitude a little bit because I think it's important to always find gratitude each day. So I'll stop there and we'll use the rest of the time to respond to questions. So feel free to type anything you want on the screen there. Travis will read it off and I will respond.
So Cynthia asked, if the Buddha is not a god or a deity, how do I take refuge in the Buddha? If I am taking refuge in the Buddha's teachings, then isn't that taking refuge in the Dharma?
So the question of if the Buddha is not a god or a deity, how do I take refuge in the Buddha? And then am I not taking refuge in the Dharma?
Well, if
Second part,
if
I'm not-
taking refuge in the Buddha is about his teachings, isn't that taking refuge in the Dharma?
Yes. So at the beginning, for me, when I make an offering, and to me this is really formal kind of ritual practice personally. And so when I do the offering and we recite what's called the triple gem, taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, it's important to understand, and as I always say, that you pointed out, the Buddha is not a god, he's not a deity, he was just a human. He lived 2,500 years ago, 500 years before Christ. He was a prince, 29 years of age, he left home, he roamed the base of the Himalayan mountains for 6 years. He studied, he practiced meditation, all kinds of things. And again, Buddhism didn't exist, he was Hindu, but he did lots of kind of yogic Hindu practices. And at 35, he became called the Buddha, which just means the awakened one. Then he taught for 45 years, then he died at 80. So as I often say, if you take refuge in the Buddha himself, he can't really help you much because he died a long time ago. But when we take refuge in the Buddha, what we're actually taking refuge in is what's called bodhicitta, or Buddha nature. And you're taking refuge in the idea that if the Buddha himself, as a human, could figure out how to end his suffering, then you'd realize that you also, as a human, can realize how to end or minimize your suffering. So you, Cynthia, are no different than Siddhartha Gautama, Shakyamuni Buddha. Siddhartha woke up, he ate, he went to the bathroom, he roamed around, he slept. You wake up, you eat, you roam around, you go to the bathroom, you sleep. So here's Cynthia, and here's the Buddha. You are equal. There's no higher or lower, there's no one above the other, there's no difference between you two. You both have breath, you have consciousness, you have human form. Everything else is conditioned. Well, consciousness is conditioned, but the breath and the human form, that's what you have. So you are no different than the Buddha. Let me back up, and I usually start with this, but just briefly, when we take refuge, refuge means many things to many people. And for me, and just listening to what people often share, refuge is comfort, safety, protection, right? Shelter, whatever the word refuge means to you. So when we find safety, comfort, protection in the Buddha, or what's known as Buddha nature, bodhicitta, we're taking refuge, finding safety, comfort, protection in the fact that you, Cynthia, can end your suffering no different than the Buddha did. It just takes a lot of work, right? So it's not another Buddhist book that's going to make you end your suffering. It's not another meditation that's going to make you end your suffering. It's not another Zoom or YouTube class that's going to make you end your suffering, right? It's you. You are the one that has to do the work. You're the one that has to see the greed, the anger, the ignorance in yourself and cultivate generosity, compassion, wisdom, just like the Buddha did. You're the one who's going to have to see through your attachments and your cravings and your desires and see the delusion in all of that, to see the impermanence in all of it, just like the Buddha did. So there's no reason that you can't end your suffering, or as I like to say, minimize it, right? The one thing I will say about the Buddha is it said he had thousands and thousands of lifetimes before being born, Siddhartha Gautama, which he, in that lifetime, awakened. So I don't know how many lifetimes any of you have had. I've had probably a few, so I got ways to go. So I don't wake up thinking this is the time I'm going to end my suffering. I just think, can I suffer less today than I did yesterday? And I find safety, comfort, protection in that, in bodhicitta, in the Buddha nature that's within me, just like you, just like everybody else. To your second part, yes, what you are taking refuge in also is the Dharma, and those are the teachings. So if you put the teachings into your life, which is a lot of what I just said, you will suffer less. So you find safety, comfort, protection in the fact that if you practice what the Buddha taught, which is called the Dharma, you will suffer less. And the third one is the Sangha. We take refuge in the Sangha, the community, right? If we didn't come together and explore this right now, or if you didn't start exploring this a few years back, you would probably be watching the news right now, and you would be miserable. So you have found refuge, safety, comfort, protection, peace of mind, whatever you want to call it, in the community that encourages you to practice, that encourages you to maybe watch less news, that encourages you to put kindness into the world. So because of these things, you are suffering less. So taking refuge in the triple gem, the three jewels, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, helps you suffer less. So hopefully that's helpful and answers your question.
So Bill asked, can we think of taking refuge in the Buddha or Buddha nature essentially the same as taking refuge in reality as it is, or the source of reality, whatever that is?
Well, there's no source of reality, and we start there. There's just reality. There's just truth. Ultimate truth. Not truth as you perceive it to be, but ultimate truth. There's no source of that ultimate truth. There's just truth. The first part of the question, I think he said, can we just take taking refuge in the Buddha as ultimate reality? Is that how he phrased it?
Taking refuge in reality as it is.
Can we consider that taking refuge in the Buddha? It's different, I think, because to me, what I see, I think in a very practical, conventional sense, when I think of taking refuge in the Buddha, or bodhicitta, or Buddha nature that is within me, I think of that requiring work and effort. And I think of something that requires work and effort is, to me, different than ultimate truth, because I live in such a delusional state of mind constantly. So I can't just like check a box and say, well, my bodhicitta is ultimate truth. I think that's ultimately maybe you could, but I don't think that's practical for me as a practitioner. I think that would be just dismissing it and saying, well, I am ultimate truth, so I'm good. No, I'm a mess. I'm filled with greed, anger, ignorance. That is not ultimate truth. Bodhicitta is what I have to cultivate, or I should say what I have to become aware of by removing the greed, anger, ignorance. Again, I say again because it's the metaphor I always use. Bodhicitta is like the sun on a rainy day or a cloudy day. The sun is always there, just like bodhicitta is always there, right? So if you're looking at it from that perspective, I guess you could say ultimate reality, but I don't consider self and consciousness as ultimate reality. It's a very conditioned phenomena that we have to be very aware of. So I think they're different. Bodhicitta requires work to get to. If you want to see the sun on a cloudy day, you have to move the clouds. And the clouds are greed, anger, ignorance. Often we read things in books and we think it's just so simple to say, well, true self is ultimate reality. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm a long ways away from having any idea of what true self is to then eventually realize non-self. So I'm going to focus on my levels of greed, anger, ignorance, and I know that bodhicitta, Buddha nature, is there. And that the Dharma, the second of the three jewels, is working to helping me see closer to ultimate truth by putting the Dharma and practice into my life. Often in the three jewels, I talk about Dharma with a capital D, where they will say that is ultimate truth, true nature of reality. But again, for someone who's very analytical with their questions, just based on the way the question was asked, these aren't things necessarily that you want to try to analyze and decipher. If I'm looking at this and I'm saying that is ultimate truth, then I'm wrong. So you can't point out ultimate truth because that's your perception. pointing out what you think is ultimate truth. And as an unenlightened being, you can't see ultimate truth because you're looking at it through a foggy lens. So don't skip getting rid of the fog. Hopefully that's helpful.
Molly asked if you could explain Zencons.
Well, first off, to explain them would defeat the entire purpose of Travis is laughing. I wish you could see Travis. Very simple answer, no. I can touch on briefly what they are, but you can't explain koans, and you might not have meant for me to literally explain them, but just to cover that, you can't explain Zen koans. It's actually very similar to what I just said. As soon as I think I've explained what a koan is, I'm wrong. So what koans are, for those who've never heard the word or aren't aware, is in the Zen practice, right, which is a specific school of Buddhism. There were many schools of Zen. The two that have survived and are practiced basically today, one is Rinzai or Linshi, which is the practice I come from, which is a mixture of Pure Land and Zen practice, because in Taiwan, my master was a Linshi, which is the Mandarin Chinese word for Rinzai master, but it's also merged with Pure Land Buddhism, which is common in places like Taiwan and Japan. So, but in that practice, we didn't do koan practice. The other school of Zen, which is Soto, does not do koan practice. But koans are, they're almost like riddles that your master would give you. And, you know, very common ones are, does a dog have Buddha nature? What's the sound of one hand clapping? If a tree falls in the forest, do you hear it? You know, there's all these koans that your master would give you. And many things occur because when someone asks you a question, especially if you're an analytical person and you always like to be right, koans are going to be torture for you. Because when one asks you a question, you want to know the answer, you want it to be correct, and again, you want to check it off and say, that's right. But my first teacher, Venerable Leisure, she used to say, Jeff, don't ever look for answers, just change your question. So that to me was a beautiful practice, because I always wanted to be right and I always wanted to know the answer. And the koans are really meant to shatter your perceptions and your attachments to views. So, yeah, that's kind of all I have to say about koans right now. They're riddles to help you understand your ignorance. It's the best way I can explain it. And then one can say, well, I'm not ignorant, especially if I got the koan right. Well, there you go. So I hope that helps. You know, you can Google Zen koans and you'll see lists of, you know, hundreds of them. And koan practice is a beautiful practice, but, you know, it's not meant to be practiced sitting in front of a computer looking at Google. It's meant to be practiced with a true Rinzai or Linshi master who gives you koans and helps you see your ignorance. So, because we don't like to see our own ignorance very often. Good question. One of my favorite, there's a lot of great Zen stories, and one of my favorites is the master says to the disciple, you know, the temple had burned down, and the master says, you know, please go build a new temple facing west. And the monk runs off and builds a temple facing west and comes back, and the master, you know, is all proud and says, I'm done. And the master says, I wanted the temple facing east. And so the disciple runs off and builds a temple facing east and comes back however long later, and Says, Master, the temple's done. And the master says, no, I wanted the temple facing south. So I love that story. Other questions, thoughts?
So Bill asked, how do we overcome greed, ignorance, and anger? Is that essentially the Eightfold Path?
Bill, do you read a lot? I'll wait for the answer. But when I say read a lot, are you reading a lot of Buddhist stuff?
Yes.
Stop. I mean that very seriously. Do not read, for Bill, and this is my suggestion, do not read another Buddhist book for the next 3 months. Because if it's the same Bill that asks the same questions, that's why I didn't want to assume and say, you know, if you were here, I think it might have been a little bit easier, but I didn't want to assume that you're reading a lot of books. I just figured I'd ask you directly. But I can tell from your questions that you read a lot of Buddhist stuff, and it's too much. It's causing you to take Buddhism as a, almost like it's a class, or you're taking this like very academic approach. And to me, Buddhism is not a class. Again, you go to classes about Buddhism. We call them that, but it's not an academic approach. It's not something that's meant to be analyzed or figured out. And so my suggestion is stop trying to figure out Buddhism. I mean this very seriously, and I've been talking about what I'm saying right now for at least 10 years. And I mean this very seriously. Stop trying to figure out Buddhism. Stop trying to figure out what it all means. Stop trying to learn all the buzzwords of Buddhism, Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path, Paramitas. Just stop all of that. And spend the next 3 months. Did I say 3 or 6? 3? Okay, all right, I'll leave it at 3. I couldn't remember if I said 3 or 6. Spend the next 3 months, and every single day, I want you to recognize when you're being greedy. And then I want you to recognize when you're being angry. And then I want you to recognize when you're being ignorant, meaning when you're perceiving something and you think you're correct. That is all. Do not read any more books. Do not learn any more Buddhist phrases. I know I'm repeating myself, but I cannot stress this enough. Abandon learning about Buddhism and start to learn about yourself without any more books. These simple 3 things, and you can do this a couple different ways. I mean, I don't want to confuse you now, but I'll give you 2 options. You could spend the next month and just focus on when you're being greedy. And then month 2, focus on when you're being angry. And month 3, focus on when you're being ignorant. Or you can just spend the next 3 months picking out all 3 of those things each day. Buddhism is a practice. It's not again, I keep coming back to this phrase, but it's not an academic course. It's not an educational tool. It's not something to memorize. You have to get to know yourself. I know you know the phrase non-self because it's in every Buddhist book you've ever read. And so then here I am saying get to know yourself, and one would say, well, if there is no self, what is there to get to know? I understand that as well. And I cannot stress enough that you cannot abide in what the Buddha referred to as non-self until you get to know the self. Zen Master Dogen talked about this very clearly. You must get to know the self until you can get rid of the self. So, sure, I can rattle off the Four Noble Truths in the Eightfold Path. And I can answer your question directly, which is the Eightfold Path the way to overcome greed, anger, ignorance? The Eightfold Path is having the correct views and thoughts and speech and action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, concentration. I've had that memorized for years, and it means absolutely nothing if I don't know my own greed, if I don't know my own anger, and if I don't know my own ignorance. So to answer your question, is the Eightfold Path the way to cultivate greed, anger, ignorance? Sure. But now that I've said yes, now what? Right? The first one, the correct views. You are filled with ignorance, my friend, as am I. Right? Do not take offense by that. We must learn our ignorance. Right? That's the first one. Thoughts, speech, action. Everything we think, everything we say, and everything we do. This is our karma. This is it. Beware of what you think, beware of what you say, beware of what you do. Just stop right there. Those are the first 4 steps in the Eightfold Path. And they do go in order. It must start with the view. Get to know your ignorance. Get to know your greed. Get to know your anger. All of these things are driven by what we think, what we say, and what we do, which is 2, 3, 4 in the Eightfold Path. Don't worry about the rest right now until you can honestly say, this is where and when I'm greedy, this is where and when I'm angry, and this is where and when I'm ignorant. You can't fix something until you understand what's going on. So, I've never been an academic. I've never approached Buddhism in a scholastic manner. It's never done me any good to do it that way. It's only benefited my life and the life of those around me when I can honestly look at myself and say, here's my greed, here's my anger, here's my ignorance. And until you call yourself out on that, the rest of the stuff that you memorized and recited doesn't do you any good. So, hopefully that's helpful. All right, so I'll close on that. Unless anything else, or are we good? Good. So we'll join palms. May the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May all be at peace. May all be free from suffering. May any merit gained from this practice be transferred to those who need it most. So a few quick announcements. Thanks all for joining us. My name is Jeff. I'm a Dharma bum. We opened up this temple 14 years ago to introduce Buddhist practice to people who show up. Those of us who lead, we're not monks, we're not nuns, we're not gurus, we're not masters, we're not teachers, we're not looking for students, we're just practitioners. We do our best to take our understanding of Buddhist teachings and put it into terms that hopefully make sense to those who show up. Every night we have different people leading different schools of Buddhist practice. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I do the intro on Tuesday. Alex does the Metta Loving Kindness meditation Wednesday. Travis does Dharma Bum Basics meditation on Thursday. And those are all on YouTube. Everything else is on Zoom. If you go to the website, thedharmabums.org, you'll see the calendar, the schedule. Click on it, it'll tell you how to join that class. All our recovery programs are going basically every night, Saturday, Sunday morning. Our teenage Sangha teen group, our college group, Monday through Friday in the mornings. So full schedule is happening. Everything we do is free, not just during the pandemic. It's always free. We don't give discounts just because there's a pandemic going on. This is life. Meditation Buddhist practice is free. A week from today, we do have a special guest who will be joining us virtually, Coach Paley Ellison, who's a great Zen teacher out in New York. We had him here, I don't know, it's probably been, I guess, maybe almost a year now, but we had him here in the past. He's just a wonderful human being. He will join this time next Saturday. So we'll be doing it live from New York. We'll have him on Zoom, and then it'll also be streamed to YouTube. But I recommend jumping to the Zoom one first, and then there'll be overflow on YouTube. Other than that, if I never see you again, think good thoughts, speak good words, do good deeds. That's really the heart of the practice. So please stay home. Please wear a mask. Please do everything you can to protect everybody else. So it's not safe right now to go anywhere. The temple is closed. It's been closed since March 12th, and it'll be closed until further notice. So thanks for being here, and I wish you well.